Hello there, this is David from David Books and Comics, and today I thought I'd talk about not the Shadow, which I talked about in a previous episode, but I thought I'd talk about a Canadian writer who died in 1942 and who was instrumental in being the inspiration for the Shadow. And his name was, among other things, among other pulp heroes, his name was Frank Lucius Packard. And as I said, Frank Lucius Packard was born in Montreal, Quebec on February the 2nd, 1877. He studied at McGill, took a Bachelor's of Science degree of Engineering at McGill University. And he worked as an engineer throughout the United States and the CPR, the Canadian Pacific Railways. In 1910 he moved back to Canada and lived along the north shore of the St. Lawrence River. So most of Frank Packard's work was to do with railroads. His more famous novels have to do with railroads and railroad mysteries. But even more than this, he became even more famous is with the Jimmie Dale adventures, which were originally published in Street and Smith magazine, serialized in Street and Smith magazine, I believe starting in 1914. So what I'll do is I'll show and share some information that I've collected about Frank Packard, and this one is from Will Murray. And Will Murray in this text, that's Walter Brown Gibson, by the way. So he notes that Gibson was an eclectic writer, and his work reflects many influences. Just like most writers, of course. He learned the knack of characterization and human interest from the Horatio Alger novels. And his knowledge of the underworld was gleaned from Frank Packard's Jimmie Dale stories. Although Gibson and many writers preferred his railroad stories. So the other important researcher besides Will Murray, of pulp magazines is Don Hutchison, and who wrote this compendium history of the pulp magazines called The Great Pulp Heroes. And in his section on the Shadow, he has information about the influences of the Shadow. And one acknowledged inspiration for the Shadow was the Jimmie Dale Alias Grey Seal. Jimmie Dale was a hero in a series of books, pulp serials written at the end of World War I by Frank Packard. So nearly 2 decades before the advent of the first pulp hero magazine, Packard wrote of a hero who stalked the night in a black mask and slouch hat to aid the helpless to bring criminals to justice. Like the Shadow, many of the Grey Seal's adventures occurred in a Chinatown setting, a sinister pulp-style Chinatown, where Tong Wars were declared. So it also says Jimmie Dale owned a luxurious Riverside Drive mansion. He had a butler. I believe his name was Jason. And he belonged to the exclusive St. James Club. As the Grey Seal, he maintained an underworld sanctuary deep in the heart of the east side of the Badlands. He also had a disguise, another disguise as Larry the Bat. So much of the inspiration for the Shadow and for many of the masked heroes of later years owe a lot to heroes like the Spider, which I showcased in another episode, and the Batman. Bears a lot of similarities to Batman. And so I'll show you the 5 Jimmie Dale novels that I have. A couple of them don't have dust jackets, and I haven't found better copies, but this is one of them. This is the first. You can flip through it, have a look. We see copyright is 1914 and 15 by Street and Smith magazine. So this was a serialized novel. Throughout his adventures, Jimmie Dale is the masked adventurer called the Grey Seal, and he goes through the underworld basically solving crimes. He's a master at safe cracking, at breaking into safes, and he has a helper throughout the stories, a woman called the Toxin, and which is similar to the Green Llama actually, and the character the Mega. It appears in the Green Llama serialized stories. So anyway, this is the first novel. The second novel that was published. This is by Kopp and Clark, a Canadian publisher, based in Toronto. Copyright is 1970. This is the original edition. Is the American edition, the Doran, George Doran Company. This is the Canadian reprint, the first Canadian reprint, or I should say the first Canadian printing. So I'll show you the second novel. The second novel is this one, and this is the Further Adventures of Jimmie Dale. And this was serialized in Street and Smith magazine between 1916 and 1917. Originally published in 1919 by George Doran. And this is as far as I know, this is the first Canadian printing. This is the Further Adventures of Jimmie Dale. The next one is this one. This is Jimmie Dale and the Phantom Clue. And here he is, all in his glory, masked. The cover art is A.D. Ron. Again, this is the Canadian edition. The original is the George Doran edition. And there we have the main characters. He has a number of aliases. And this is basically a mystery novel, inspired in large part by Raffles' character and by Sherlock Holmes. So this is a very good, fine copy of Jimmie Dale and the Phantom Clue. The fourth book in the series is this one. This is Jimmie Dale and the Blue Envelope Murder. And you see, after he would solve a crime, he would leave his trademark, and often it'd be a stamped gray seal. Ergo the gray seal on the cover. And this is the American edition, A. Albert, copyright 1930, and this is a hardcover first edition. And the last book in the series is this one. And this is a Crime Club selection. This is Jimmie Dale and the Missing Hour. Just plain end papers. There you go. Grey Seal and the Toxin again join forces in a thrilling battle against the underworld. And this was published originally in 1935. Okay, this is that one. And I'll also show you some of the other dust-jacketed books that I have of Frank Packard, which you might want to see. Packard was a prolific writer, very popular writer, and he wrote mostly mystery novels. This is a sea story mystery novel. It's called Two Stolen Idols. It has a moral theme to it. It has a beautiful cover. Dust jacketed. These books are, because he was such a prolific writer, these books are not that difficult to find. Most bookstores, used bookstores that sell vintage books, usually have these on their shelves. So this is Two Stolen Idols. Beautiful cover. This is Doran, George Doran. And this one is, by all intents, a first edition. So that's Two Stolen Idols. And this one is The Sin That Was His. Beautiful dust jacket. Again with a moral story to it. And this has a Canadian setting. And I also wanted to show you this one. This one was published in 1918. It's a railroad story, and it features another masked character. And it's a singleton novel, because he doesn't appear in any other of the other stories. This was originally published as an original by George Doran in 1918. This is the first Canadian Cop and Clark. And the Hawk, as he's called, basically uses why it's called the Wire Devils. He uses the wiretapping and the Morse code tapping to solve crimes. The setting of this particular story is all on the railroad. So this one, the Wire Devils. This is the Red Ledger mystery novel. Nice cover. And this one is the Four Stragglers. This one has a kind of Counting of Monte Cristo theme story. It's an interesting, really well-written novel. Same artist, E.B. Ron. And this one is The Devil's Mantle. Beautiful dust-jacketed original novel. Copyright 1927. This one I discovered in a used book. It was an antique shop, actually, on just outside of New Brunswick, I believe. This is The Devil's Mantle. And for those who love railroad stories, there's this one. This is The Night Operator. And I believe this is a series of stories with one linked character. And it draws on Packard's experience as a railroad engineer. So that's that one. The Night Operator. This is the Cop and Clark. last dust jacket I have of is this one, Pond. And again, it's Kopp and Clark. They're publishers that were based just on Front Street in the city of Toronto. So copyright 1921. So that's Pond. I want to show you some of the ones. I have a lot of the ones that are not that don't have dust jackets, but I'll show you a couple just because of their spines. There's this one, The Purple Ball. Kind of a beautiful book, neatly bound and standing the test of time. So this was copyright 1933. And this is the A.L. Burt edition. So this was likely, more than likely, the first, but without a dust jacket. And then there's this one. This is like a Jimmie Dale type story. The White Mall. It's about a woman who dresses in a veil and has an alter ego as this miserly lady. And it basically is a mystery novel. And then it features also a masked character called the Adventurer. This is called The White Mall. His stories were, in its day, what they would call thriller novels or thrill novels or detective novels, which often featured a twist, a surprising twist to a mystery at the end. The Jimmie Dales are mystery novels, but classified as kind of escapade type mystery novels. Something that was quite the vogue back in the day, in the 1910s up until the 1930s. All right, so that's my foray into looking at the my collection of Jimmie Dale, the one of the originators of the masked hero that we find in modern day superhero stories, especially for those who follow the Batman and the Shadow. The Shadow was probably the greatest influence on Batman, but before the Shadow and Batman was the Grey Seal, alias Jimmie Dale. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this little foray into the history of the origins of the Shadow, but also the covers that I showed of the Frank Packard novels, and especially the Jimmie Dale series. And if you did, remember to give me the like. Thank you all for subscribing, and I appreciate all of those who enjoyed the episodes that I've shown, and feel free to comment with any questions you may have if you're curious to know more about Frank Packard. Okay, thanks. Bye.